Trusted by some of the world's top enterprise brands, Fulcrum Mobility gives business and IT executives a single application development platform that allows them to build, deploy, manage, and update all their enterprise mobile solutions with an affordable, fixed-price suite that takes minutes rather than weeks to build quality applications. With an easy-to-use interface and native APIs, mobile solutions for Oracle, SAP, and other back-office systems can be built in under an hour by any developer with some SQL and PL/SQL knowledge. I'll let you see for yourself as I show an example of how easy it is to create an application. Creating, modifying, and deploying a mobility routine is a straightforward process. What we're going to show here is the way to do this with a very simple SQL script. What you see on the screen is a template that can be provided by Fulcrum that allows you to define the routine and define the table that we're going to save the data to. So to start with, we're going to define the header information of the routine, including what we want to call the routine. So I'm going to call this submit leave request. We're going to be defining a routine that allows a user on a mobile device to submit a leave request. And we can define the prompt. So this is what will show up to the user on the device. And as such, we can use mixed case. The template name, we're going to just use a standard template that comes with mobility. And then finally, the target table. So this is where we define where the data is going to go to. And I'm going to bring up the database schema. And I've got a table called catscust_leave that we've defined to store our leave requests in. All right, so this is going to be our target table, which I've highlighted. And then below, you can see the columns of data. So some of these columns we will be using when we define this routine, those columns which we want to populate data into. So back to my script. My target table is our table that we want to input data into via the routine. The next step is to add in the fields. So the fields correspond to the columns of the target table. So if we look at the definition of the table again, our columns are such as type TRX, status, request type, leave balance, and so on. So essentially, I'm mapping the routine to these columns. So the first thing I'm going to do is define a column called type TRX. And of course, analysis would be performed to decide what you want to capture and why you want to capture it. So I've mapped the column. I'm going to give it a prompt. And then I have the ability to set additional attributes, including whether the field is required, default values, clear value, whether I'm going to keep a previous input or require a new input, whether the field is visible to the user on the mobile device, a loop field, so upon iterations of the routine, where do I want the routine to go back to, and then before and after logic, which I'll get into at a later point. So we're going to make this a required field, so I'm going to flip the flag from no to yes. I'm going to leave clear value as no. I'm actually going to make this a hidden field, so I'm going to leave visible as no, and I don't want it to loop here. Okay. So that's the first field I've set in the routine, and I can go on and continue to set additional fields mapping to the columns in the target table. So the next field is request type. And if, again, we look back at our target table, this is the field that I'm mapping to. And again, I can set a prompt. So this is what shows up to the user. I want them to have to enter a value. I'm going to clear the value, so they have to enter a new value every time. I'm going to make it visible, and I'm going to loop on this field, so they always come back to this every time they want to make a transaction. And then I continue on defining the fields in the routine as they map to the table. I'm going to put in a field called leave balance. And so that's our next field in our table. And of course, the order in which I want the fields in the routine are entirely up to me. And to the user, this is going to be current leave balance. It's not going to be a required field. I am going to clear it. I'm going to keep this visible, and we won't loop on it. And so essentially I continue to move down the routine and create the additional fields as needed. So I'm going to quickly go through and create my additional fields that I want in the routine. And again, these are all based upon the fields that I want to, or the columns that I want to capture data into in my table. So I put in a request start date and now I'm putting in a request end date to the user. This will be leave start date and end date, and I actually made a typo up here, so let me fix that. Okay. And I'll set the attributes as I feel is appropriate. Moving on to my next field. So you can see that actually defining the routine and the fields is pretty straightforward, right? As long as you understand the table that you want the data to go to. Finally, I'm going to include a field at the bottom. That is going to be another hidden field. I don't necessarily have to put in a prompt for the hidden field, but I'll go ahead and just for the sake of consistency. So I'm going to keep the visible flag as no. This is going to allow me to capture data around who is logged on and created, and we'll show how we do that. Okay, so at this point I have actually created a basic routine here that allows me to start collecting data. Subsequently, we will tweak this to include additional functionality. So now that we've created a basic routine, we want to go ahead and deploy this routine so that we can see it run on the mobile device. The next step is assigning access to the routine to a profile, and that's done in the permissions section of our SQL script. I'm going to actually show the CATS web application to view the current profiles that are defined. So within the web application under mobility, we have a profile section. This also shows the mobility UI, which we'll come back to and show how you can use this as well to make modifications to a routine. So I'm going to go ahead and use the admin profile. So if I go back to my script, it's as simple as putting in the name of the profile, and then I'm also going to put in the contact code of the user who created the routine. In this case, this is my user. Okay, so at this point we have a SQL script that should run that will give us a routine and assign it to the admin profile. So I'm going to go ahead and run this using, in this case, SQL Developer against the database. So I've pasted it in. I'm going to go ahead and run the script, and we see that the procedure has been successfully completed. So I'll go ahead and commit that. Okay, so now we have a, as mentioned, very basic routine that we can run on our device. So over on the right hand side, this is a a window into my mobility device. I'm going to go ahead and log in and load the admin profile. Now this routine will be in the other, and we see that we have a routine now called submit leave request. And as I go ahead and work through the routine, we see that the first prompt is enter leave request type. We can see that that is visible, whereas our actual first field in the routine is not visible, type TRX, so that's a hidden field. So I can continue to work through. I'll put in some data, enter the current leave balance. I can enter data, my leave start date. Right, so you can see the routine is defined based upon the fields that we've chosen. I'll choose the 24th. Enter leave end date. We'll say the 25th. The hours I want to take. And then finally comments. So we've created a routine. However, there are things that we can make the routine much more useful to the user. So what we want to do is now modify the routine using the mobility keywords and language, which we'll introduce, that will make the routine much more usable. So we've created a basic routine and we deployed that and we've run it on a mobile device. But the routine is lacking a bit of usability that we may want for our users. So we're going to go ahead and modify the routine now to add some of that functionality in. And again, we can do that directly within our SQL script that we've already defined around the routine. So one of the things I'm going to do is add in a default value to our transaction type, so that in our database we can start to segment out data as its input. On our leave request type, the field here, let's add in the ability to have a pick list of different types of leave requests. This is done using a number of what we call mobility keywords and the combination of those keywords in a meta language. The document we see up here is our mobility installation and configuration guide, which documents all those keywords and their functionality. You can see, so there's an entire library of different things that we can utilize within the routine to get the routine to behave in certain ways. Some of those include SQL-based logic keywords. So using the keyword and a basic understanding of writing select statements, we can do some really interesting things. I am going to be using a keyword called dynamic list SQL. And I'm going to essentially, as mentioned, define a very simple select statement that creates a pick list for the user. Now deploying this is as simple as what we did previously, where I take my script and I run it against the database. And we can see that the procedure is successfully run. Now, if I just reload my profile and go to my routine, we can see now I have a magnifying glass for leave request type. When I click on that, I get two values, PTO and sick. So now I've defined a list of values that a user can select from. So again, using the keywords and the combination in our meta language, you can do a number of very interesting things. Another thing I can do is populate certain data into certain fields. So I'm going to create another statement, again using a very simple SQL select statement. this case, I'm actually pulling data from my database. Okay, so we have a very simple select here that's going to select the column number 1 from a specific data table in the database, given certain where clauses. I'm also using data input into the routine, so for example the request type that is selected, and I'm also using some special values that we can variables that are automatically collected in the routine, one being contact code, to populate our leave balance field, which is the field we're on. So again, now that I've defined using my keyword, I'll just run it against the database again. And if I go ahead and just reload my profile, all the changes should come over. So now we can see that I have a leave balance of 24 as what is reflected in the database. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out the rest of the routine to add in some of this additional functionality, so that we have a much more usable routine. So I've gone ahead and added some additional keyword functionality into the routine. Specifically, for example, I've made it so that the leave end date can't be before the leave start date, and that's done here in this block. So again, a fairly simple select statement that anyone with basic SQL skills could write, and just understanding again the keywords, which are all documented in our configuration guide. I've also essentially put in messaging that if the requested hours based upon our leave start and end dates is greater than our balance, the user is going to get a message. Okay. So let's go ahead and again run this against our database so that we can deploy our changes. Okay, so successfully completed. And again, we'll just reload our profile, which will bring down all the latest changes. So now if we go ahead and run through the full routine, we'll see that additional functionality. Again, we've already put in, for example, the ability to see what our current leave balance is. I'll select a start date of tomorrow. Now, per our functionality, if I select a start date that's before, or an end date, excuse me, that's before the start date, I get a message to the user. All right, so we need to utilize a end date that's beyond our start date. Also, if I put in a date that results in hours that are more than my current balance, I get another message to the user. So I click OK. All right, so let's just take 2 days off then. So we'll say tomorrow and Friday, which results in 16 hours, which is below our current balance. And then I have a comment section, which if I want to, I can add a comment into. And I click next, and we've created a transaction. So there's our routine with enhanced functionality based upon using some of the mobility keywords. And if we take a look in the database, we had our table here. So I'm just going to take a look into that table. And now we can see that we've actually been able to submit data directly into that table. So we have our submit leave of a type of PTO for P. Burke, and the requested start and end dates, and the hours and the comments. Okay, so we've successfully created a routine in roughly 20 minutes that has a fair amount of usability and functionality for the user to submit their leave requests. So we now have a fully functioning routine that's been deployed, and we've seen how it works. And we've created and managed changes through a SQL script that we run against the database. That's made it very easy to manage those changes. As previously mentioned, additionally, we also have the CATS web application, which has a UI for defining changes in mobility. We previously saw our list of profiles, and we had added through the script a routine to the admin profile. I can also add the routine to additional profiles through this UI. So for example, the field user profile, we can see the current routines that are already assigned to it. If I want to add our new routine of submit leave request, then I can use the form to do exactly that. If I go ahead and save this, and then I reload my profiles, and instead of using the admin, if I go to field user, I now have the submit leave request routine, just as it was for the admin profile. Let's say I want to make changes to the routine itself. Well, we know we can do that through the script and just running the script against the database. But again, the CATS web UI also allows me to make changes here. So here's our routine. So for example, if I wanted to change the name of the routine, or if I wanted to add information to the user, down below we see the definition of the routine with respect to the different fields. And again, we defined this previously using the prompt. For example, I can change a prompt. So instead of leave request type, I'll call it type of request. And let's say I want the comments as well to come a little farther up in the routine. So I could actually put that right below current leave balance. So I could say this is 4, and I'll just kind of reorder subsequent fields. I have the ability to bring things over. Also do things like change whether a field is required or not, whether I want to show it, which field is the loop field. Additionally, the logic can be modified within this UI as well. So for example, we created a pick list of PTO and sick. Let's say I want to change one of these values to just personal. So I can use the UI to make those types of changes. And if I save the record, and again, just reload my profile. Now we can see that the title of the routine has been changed with the inclusion of the your word. I have an info button that I can click on now. And I go into the routine. Our type of request, instead of leave request type, has been modified. We now have a type of personal instead of PTO. In this case, we'll try the sick. Again, previous functionality is still there. We've moved the comments up. And the routine goes on as we previously defined it. So again, you can use the UI just as we use the SQL script to make those kind of changes and deploy them very quickly to your user base. So in closing, I hope that this demonstration has shown how straightforward, simple, and quickly we can define mobility routines for data capture, both with minimal SQL skills and database skills, but also using some of the built-in functionality to the web application. Thanks.